Okay, so I hope that everyone is seeing my screen okay?
Oh, yeah, Sansil, sorry. We are seeing your screen. It's good.
Okay, thank you.
Cool.
All right, so we are going to touch on receivables for Dynamics GP. We're going to go through a bit of the windows, the setups, inquiry windows, the cards, transactions, reports, etc. We are not going to touch on sales order processing because that is something separate and apart from receivables management, and that involves inventory. However, we are going to look at the receivables module, and we're going to start off with the setup window. So in the receivables management setup, here you have different options. So here you are able to set passwords in GP for your exceeded amounts. You're able to set for remove customer holds, exceed maximum write-offs, as well as your waive finance charges, right? With the aging periods, you have the ability to move between setting the due document date as well as the document date option as well. So with the due date, if you set it on due date, it means that anything now from 30 days from today, it will be within the current bucket. Now, if you change your date based on the document date, if you have a document, say, for example, that has been outstanding for 1 day, then it's going to appear within that aging period. So by default, we are going to leave it as the document date, right? Now, the passwords that I mentioned here can change, right? If it is you want to process for a customer that's already at the credit limit to actually post it invoice, you can make this password enable, right? And like I said, the same thing goes with your write-offs, finance charges, etc. Right? Taking your customer on and off hold, you are able to set passwords like for those options. We are going to leave the passwords as is. Some other options that we have available to us is, for example, if you want to age discounts or age credit limits, you are able to choose that option, right? So just keep in mind that your trial balance is able to show that information. If you are, or if you want the ability to also reprint statements, just keep in mind if you have this disabled, you're only going to be able to print it once. So you can set the reprint statements option as checked, right? You are also able to warn if customers are over limits. So you can have that selected. So these are cues that you can set up in the customer, in the system. So if the customer is almost at their credit limit or about to exceed their credit limit, you are able to be notified. There will actually be a red dot that's going to show up in the system against that transaction. Now, if it is you want to see, if you want to set up, say, an NSF charge of, in this case, it's currently set to $15. You can set your default check ID, your price levels. You can set different level of price levels depending on if your customers, you're doing sales or your browse the same based on items. So your default price level is going to be what everyone is set up by default, right? So you can override the price level by default. And let's take a look at some of the options that are available to us. Now, by default, it's set up with these numbers. You are able to change your codes based on what you want to have that set up, but this is the default. This is the default setup. So if you really wanted to, you can actually reduce the zeros in here. I mean, if it is, you think you're going to have 10,000 documents for finance charges, then you can leave it, or you can reduce the amount of zeros as wish. Right. Other things that you can keep in mind is if it is you want to include your sales history, you can, a lot of people do include their history, their sales history. So you can also do it for discount, freight, miscellaneous, and tax. Right? If you have some user-defined fields, you can identify that. If it is you want to have user-defined to as maybe location or something of that sort, then you can actually tag a customer type to this field that you would have created. All right. So same concept for customer address. You can identify some user-defined fields that you would like to tag the customer address to. All right. Now we have the sales, freight, and miscellaneous. Now, if it is you would like to set up your sales tax, you would have to set up in your customer setup window first, and then you would assign it to this window. All right. Now in the customer setup window, sorry, we have something called customer class. Now with the customer class, it is usually based on more so for reporting purposes. It's actually for you, it's going to allow you to now speed up the process of adding a new customer to the system. So let me pull up one of the class that I have here. This is a class ID that's currently in the Fabricam company. If I click on accounts, you can see the default AR accounts. You can see it defaults to a specific checkbook. And then in there's where you would have, you can set your specific options. So that way, when you're setting up your customer, you don't have to input this information every time you have to set up a customer. All right, so it is important to set up the customer class just to speed up the process and have things going when you're ready to start setting up your customers. Right? So once you set up the customer and you choose class, all the options that you would have set up in that class would roll down for that customer. Right? So you have your accounts receivable, accounts, sales, cost of sales, etc. So that's the main concept behind class ID. It's just to allow for the speeding up of the process and for reporting services. All right, these are the settings here. What speaks to sales order processing, and we're not going to be touching that area. At least not today, maybe in some other training session. So let's move on to the card section. Now in cards is where you're going to be able to set up your master records in the system, right? So here where you're going to set up your customers, here's where you're going to set up your addresses, salespersons. That type of information is what you're going to have stored in your cards. So we're going to go to our customer. And this is our customer maintenance window. I wouldn't set up a new customer from scratch, but we would go through the customer. So let's select one of our customers in the system. Let's see. So let's use the first one. Right, so here you can see that it's currently set to a class called New Billing, right? When we set up this customer originally, this new billing class, it will actually be sorry, 1 second. Sorry, this new USA class, it actually defaulted. So all the information that you're currently seeing in front of you, it's because of the class that's set up for this customer and this class ID for the USA MNW T4. Right, and this is going to, as I said previously, is going to prevent you from having to set up this customer from scratch again. So here you have the username, right, or the company name, and then you have the short name for this customer, right? In older versions, you are also going to be able to enter statement names, and that is what you can change and also define that as well. At the bottom left here, you're going to see different address IDs. So say, for example, you have a customer, say, for example, that has a central location and they have multiple ship to locations. You can actually set up each of their ship to customers in the system so that way, when they are processing invoices, if you are actually sending products to those customers, you are able to select that ship to information at that particular time that you are sending that product to the customer, right? And the same thing would go to the bill to as well. If you have multiple billing departments, for example, and you are able to also set that up in the system as well. So that way, when you are processing invoices, it actually goes to as different set of bill to information, right? You have also salesperson ID, you have territory. All of this you can also set up if it is you want to also generate sales commissions for specific salespersons. This can also be set up in the system as well, right? The any user defined fields that you also set up would be available here as well. With the shipping method, this is important, and it's going to be important for sales tax. So if, for example, you have a shipping method that's currently set to pickup, if you have to send an invoice to this customer, what it's going to do is going to tell you that the customer is actually coming to your facility to pick up their product, right? So therefore, when you're assessing the sales tax, it's going to base that sales tax based on the location of your facility. Now, if you set it to delivery, this is going to actually use a combination of the sales tax rates, the ship to address. It's also going to use the shipping method, and it's going to use all those three to calculate that sales tax percentage based on the deliver to address. So that's important to note. With the tax schedule ID, you can set a default tax schedule ID. right? All right, and we currently have it set to these two tax details. So if we drill down into the tax detail, here you can see this is actually Illinois state. Right, and this one is Chicago being the city. Now, if you want to add if you would like to see basically your customer account maintenance, you can view that under the accounts information. Right here, you have your checkbook ID, you have your various accounts. Now, if it is you want to process an invoice ahead of the time, you can process the invoice. This will be the default checkbook it's going to go to. Let's go into options. There are a couple of different options here. We have, for example, we have finance charge, we have percent. We have the maximum percentage for this customer. Right? What it's going to do is calculate 1.5% of their outstanding balance. So the credit limit, currently it's set to unlimited, but you can actually set a credit limit amount, right? And be specific in terms of what credit limits you would like for that particular customer. Or if it's an unlimited credit limit, you can leave it as such as well. With maximum write-offs, without setting a maximum in here, if you select not allowed, if you don't put in maximum or unlimited, it's not going to allow you to write off balances to their accounts whatsoever. So you need to take that into consideration. So if it is you would like to write off to their account, you need to either set it as unlimited or give it a maximum amount. You are also able to set up credit cards for the customer in the system. That is a whole different topic. It's much larger, as it's not as straightforward. So that's not a discussion that we're going to go in today. But you are able to set that up in the system. Right, this is the credit card setup window, and here's where you will be setting up that option as well, if it is you would like to use it. With the email option, here is going to allow you to enable the customer to receive Word template documents. So if I select enable, it gives me the ability to select sales quote, receivables, invoice, customer statements, etc. So if you are familiar with the reporting GP, basically, once I select any of these, or for example, in relation to what we are doing, if I select receivables invoice, what this is going to allow is that our Word template is going to be sent to the customer. And now this is providing that you have Word templates set up in the system. So when the customer does in fact receive the Word template, the default message ID that they are going to receive is going to be the sales document one, right? And this is also what you need to set in the system. Without these options that I have selected here, without having it enabled, you cannot email this customer Word templates documents out of the system, right? In case of the Word templates versus the out-of-the-box templates. The Word templates are more appealing, right? So it's considered better looking documents. But however, if it is you are unable to use Word templates, or you're not using Word templates for any reason, the customer is going to receive the out-of-the-box reports, right? So that's the basics of this customer setup. There's another feature that persons use for receivables management, and that's national accounts. Now, if, for example, you have a customer and you have multiple customers in the system that represents that one customer, then you can set up parent-child relationships within the system, right? So right in the national accounts, you can select your parent customer. For example, we just choose the first one. And we can say that Accurate Printing Children is Cedar Family Counseling. And let's say maybe Launch Hardware. So what this is going to do is going to allow you to report for your receivables trial balance purposes. So it's going to allow you to say that Accurate Printing has or is owing everything that's currently attached to it, right? So we have Cedar and Launch Hardwood attached to the Accurate Printing account. So everything that's attached to the Accurate Printing is everything owed under Cedar, everything owed under Launch Hardware, right? So, and also when you are going to be processing the cash receipt, you have the ability to now select Accurate Printing as your customer, and then you can apply it to the invoices that are attached to these customers, right? So that's kind of the gist of how national accounts work. But there is a little bit more detail that you can do if you need to do any more digging on the national accounts, but that's overall what the functionality allows. Now, if you ever get in a situation where you want to refund for check purposes, this is where you would start, right? So this is also a much larger conversation, right? But as in essence allows you to refund check process. So there's where you would actually go to do that. You can set up your salespersons under the salesperson's entry. Lock boxes, these are also more advanced that we can't set up today. It's not something that we could actually get in today because it's also, like I said, it's more an advanced topic as well. But you are able to download a file from your lockbox bank, and you can upload that file. And you can actually upload that file into your system and then record your cash receipts all at one time. So it's very interesting. Just keep in mind, if you are doing high volume of transactions, I would recommend using the lockbox, right? So let's move on to the transaction entry screen. Now, the next step that we're going to do is process an invoice. So under the transaction, we are going to go into transaction entry. All right. Just so that we are clear, the top section here of the transaction entry speaks to sales order processing. So we are skipping over these because we are going to be dealing with the receivables transaction entry window. So first thing you're going to notice is that you have your type. You're going to either be using a sales invoice, a debit memo, sorry, a credit memo, etc. So we're going to leave it as a sales invoice. And we're going to give it a description, goods and services. Now, if you are going to be processing a lot of invoices, I would create a batch, right? And that just allows you to keep track of all your invoices in one batch. So I can call this batch, let's call it test batch. It's asking me if I want to add this batch. Yes. Right. Sales processing. Right, as the comment. Now, you have the frequency in which you would like to, how often you would like to process this batch. Now you have the posting date. I am going to leave my posting date as is. You also have the checkbook ID. And if you're processing invoices, this checkbook ID is not really going to come into play in this instance. But if you are going to be booking, say, cash that you receive at the same time, then that's only really and truly when the checkbook ID would come into play in this window, right? So I'm going to save this batch ID to come out of the batch window. I am going to enter my document date. Well, I'm actually going to leave it as the same. This is actually what we're going to be aging off of, which is your document date. Right, we have the customer, and our customer is going to be Accurate Printing. Now, just remember, if this customer has multiple addresses, as I mentioned prior, you are able to select it here at this time. So you are able to use the lookup and select an address in which you want to assign to this customer. Right? All this information here is defaulting from the customer setup. And we also mentioned that earlier. That is actually defaulting from the class ID in the customer setup in which we assigned to the customer. So all that information is going to default here. Here we have also the tax ID. If there's a PO number, you can enter that PO number. Now, if there's a cost, you can enter this information here, and what that's going to do is going to create some sort of cost adjustment in the distributions. All right. For now, we are just going to enter sales amount. So our sales amount would be $3,000. You can allow the customer to receive a trade discount if you wish, depending on maybe they're a good customer and you want to give them a discount. So say we want to give them a $20 discount, right? You are able to also enter free charges. So let's say $50 for trade. Miscellaneous, we're going to leave that blank for now. With the sales tax, as I mentioned earlier, it actually calculates from the location of this customer, right? So it calculates from the location because the shipping address selected says ground delivery. And the ground delivery that we have selected here, if we drill down, it shows delivery, right? And this is saying that we are delivering to this customer address, and therefore the taxes are going to be based on this customer address. If it was set to pick up, as I mentioned previously, it's going to be assessing that sales tax based on your company location, right? But because it's set to delivery, it's going to be based on the address of the customer. All right. So once you are satisfied with this entry, you can move on. However, if at the time you did receive cash, you can actually enter that information in this window here. So you can say that you received $1,000, right? And it's going to denote this information here. So this is here, is where you're going to actually select your checkbook, and this is where this will actually come into play. But we are not going to say that we received any cash. We're just going to do receivables invoice without cash being received just yet. So in the distributions, you are going to see the distributions that has been populated from your customer setup. And if your customer did not have any of the information that's being displayed is probably missing, it is going to still pick it up from your company setup, because that's where you set up your global information and you are going to set up your posting information within the company setup window, and that's global to Dynamics GP. So it is company-wide. So it's going to pull either from the customer or it's going to pull from the company setup. So we're not changing anything here. We're leaving everything here as is, and let's select OK. So let's go ahead and save this receivables transaction, right? And we have actually saved it. So let's pull it back up. So just to see, right. So I already have my batch built. So I can post my batch. Right. Now, if you had more transactions to process, you can add more transactions to this batch. And then when you are ready to post, then you can go ahead and, like I did, click the blue arrow, it will open up the batch window and you can post all your batches. Now, before you post, you need to close the receivables transaction entry window before you post. So let's click. Now, if I did not close that window and I clicked post with the receivables entry window open, it is going to notify you that you're currently processing transactions in the test batch. So hence the reason why I closed it before I decide to post. So I have my batch. I have one transaction, but batch total is $3,242.10. And my posting date is 4/12, and this is the date it's going to actually be hitting the GL, right? And this is of the year of 2017. If you are going to process a batch of transactions and say that you know that maybe the batch of transactions is going to be around 20 transactions that you're going to process. You can put your control number in transactions, and this is going to actually prevent you from posting, right? Because what this is going to do is going to wait until your actual number of transactions match this control number that you have here. Same thing with the batch total. If you're going to process $5,000 in invoices, for example, it's not going to allow you to post this batch until you have $5,000 worth of invoices within the batch, right? For now, we are only going to post this one batch. We're not processing any more invoices at this time. So we're going to go ahead and click post. You can take a look at the posting journal report. You can cancel everything else. I don't really care about the check posting journal either. So let's wait until that process. Okay. So here we have our header information. Here we have our distributions that are going to impact your general ledger. And if you scroll down a little bit further, scroll down a little bit further. So if you scroll down a little bit further, it gives you some information on your sales tax that you have here. And if you had a salesperson included on this invoice, it would also show the salesperson on this report as well, right? So the receivables posting journal is a pretty good report, as it's going to be useful report. I mean, you have the ability to go back in and print this report after the fact, but it's a very useful report that you use for like audit purposes and whatnot. Right, so you can print it as you go, but if you do close it off accidentally, you can always go back and pull the report. So that's the first section. We have now processed the sales invoice to our customer, and we have the money now in our receivables. So we are going to wait now to get paid from our customer. So a couple of days has passed and we are able to receive payment. Let me close this window off. Okay, so we are going to receive payment from our customer. So now where we want to go, we want to actually go and book a cash receipt, right? So in the cash receipt window, right here, we can now put in our customer ID. That's the first thing that we're going to need. So our customer was Accurate Printing, right? Now, the type of payment that we receive would be cash, a cash payment. Now, if you wanted to, you can recognize it as being a check payment as well. You can put in the check number and all of that, but for now, we're going to leave it as cash. We received $1,500. Right? We received $1,500 from Accurate Printing, right? Our checkbook is from Uptown Trust. Now let's go to our apply account window and let's start making payments against our transactions. So let's apply it to this first invoice. And let's apply the balance to this invoice. All right. So as you can see, our balance out of the $1,500 that we had applied, we are now down to zero. So I have fully applied this invoice. So in this window, there's also the write-offs, which we mentioned in the setup of the receivables window. So here you can see that we applied in the first invoice, we applied $1,050, and in the second invoice, we applied $450. Now, if it is you want to write off some of these invoices, you are able to do that right in this window. So currently our write-off, I believe I set it to, I think it was $50 or $25. I can't really remember right now. But in this window, what you can do is say, I would like to have a write-off amount to say, let's write off $10 for this customer, right? So you are able to write off part of this invoice. And say, for example, we could do another one. If, for example, this customer, for this customer, we want to write off for this customer, let's say for this customer, let's write off, we could write off $10 here as well. So your cash receipts are fully applied, your invoices are fully applied. There's nothing else for us to do, right? If it is you want to write off any more payments, you are able to do so, like I said, right in this window. But once you're okay with everything that you have applied, we can move on. So we have already fully applied this invoice. So basically the date that we applied the cash was this apply date. And remember, I've mentioned previously that this is important for aging purposes. It's important because if your apply date was, say, for example, instead of the 4th of the 12th, and say you change this to maybe the 5th of the 12th, now, if you were to run an aging, say for the ending of the ending of the 4th month, for example, this invoice is going to still be outstanding. Reason being because your apply date is now the 5th month as opposed to the 4th, right? So just keep in mind that the apply date that you have mentioned here would affect your outstanding invoices, which actually shows up as outstanding invoices, right? So you want to just make sure that your apply date is correct. So therefore, your aging report, sorry, and your trial balance would be okay, right? So once you are fine here, right, then click OK. Right, and here you can post. Oops. Okay, so it has already been posted. All right, so we are already posted, and in the previous one, we printed the cash posting journals. I am also going to post the print the cash posting journal in this as well. I'm going to close off the detailed breakdown register and also the cash summary breakdown register and also the checkbook posting journal, right? Right, so here we have the posting receipts. In our Fabricam company for receivables. All right, so let me close this window off. So the next window is the apply sales document window. So say, for example, you run an aging for this particular customer and this customer does have an outstanding credit memo, right? You are able to now open up this apply sales document window. Let's say for our customer accurate printing, we want to see the list of credit memos. All right, let's actually see if we could pull something that's currently in the system. Let's see if there's any. Okay, so here we are able to actually see what we have under the apply documents window, and it's going to let us apply to a few of these sales invoices. Just so the apply sales documents window can be a part of your monthly process. Pretty straightforward. You are able to apply directly straight from this window. In a situation where you may need to send money back to a customer, you can't just do it through the refund checks. You are able to send the money out on the payable side. Lockbox entry, we did mention that previously. Serious post. If, for example, you do only as maybe a manager in the system, you're the only person in the organization who has the ability to post, or one of the persons in the organization who has the ability to post, maybe the clerks in the organization don't have that security privileges. They could only probably build the batch once they obtain the approvals, then they are able to save the batch. Everything in series post is going to now allow you to view all of the outstanding batches at one time. So here I can come in and I can see, okay, these are the outstanding batches for me to post. And you are able to select a particular batch, and you as the manager can actually select and post them all at once, right? So this is also important, right? We did show how we could post earlier, but this is if it is you want to post multiple batches at a time. All right, in the edit transaction information, this window is going to allow you to say, for example, you do have an invoice or invoices that were already posted, but you probably need to make a change on that invoice. This window is going to allow you to do that. It's going to allow you to make a change, but it's going to be something simple. Maybe you need to change the description, or maybe you need to change the discount date or the due date, or even the PO number as examples, right? If it is you are say, for example, want to change the invoice amount, you are unable to change that. That information is not available here. So it's not something that you can change. And then that's also a red flag for audit purposes if they did allow you to make that change, right? So some things you are able to change once the transaction has already been posted, but other things, not so much. With the receivable batches, we did look at this window earlier, but you are able to look at all your outstanding batches and you are able to just select them and post them here as well. So that's the transaction entry window. Let's take a look at the inquiry window. So if it is you want to look at a customer in this case, we can go in transaction by customer. We can pull the customer. So let's look at accurate printing. And we can look at all their transactions for that customer. All right. If you want to look at all the customers and all their transactions, because you are unable to do that in this window. This is particularly for one customer that you want to see all the transactions for. But if it is you do want to see all customers and all their specific transactions, etc., you would need to pull a report for that, right? You can either do a system generated report, maybe a smart list report to get that information that you're looking for, right? So here you can see there are some options. So say, for example, let's just look at the unposted transactions and we redisplay. Okay, so there's currently nothing in unposted, right? We can look at all our transaction in history. Right, so currently everything is in open. Right, so other options, if it is you wanted to filter, you can filter based on the document date. After you put in your filter, here you can set the date and then you click redisplay and that's going to filter based on your options selected up here. Right, so you can set the criteria that you want and then redisplay based on those filters. All right, pretty straightforward. Transaction by document. You may have an invoice that you probably want to see. You type in that particular invoice, you click redisplay, and it's going to display that invoice on this window. Right, pretty straightforward window as well. There are a couple of summary windows, mainly being used if it is, for example, you want like a holistic view or like a snapshot of the customer. Say, for example, let's check what period summary. For example, we can choose our customer, accurate printing, and this window is going to actually pick a particular period and we're going to be able to see the invoices that were applied to this vendor, the cash that came in, etc. Yeah. And in the cards, there was also a summary window as well that we didn't look at, but this is also another summary window here. So it allows you to check even the credit summary tab. So you can check the average days of pay for this customer. If there were any cash receipts in the section, there may be a last check date, etc. But this is basically to give you like a holistic view, like a snapshot of that particular customer. You can view the summary windows, right? There are multiple ways that you can just view snapshots for invoices for a particular customer in the system. There are many summary windows that you can use to your advantage. And now back to the inquiry window. We can look at the customer inquiry. For example, so I want to bring back. So we have the sales, sorry, the customer in the cards. And we also have, so this is what the customer maintenance window looks like. But you also have the ability to do an inquiry. Look at the customer inquiry. Now, the difference between these two is that this is just going to show the information of the customer. Basically, if you don't want to change anything on the screen and you just want to see information. On this screen here, that allows you to edit, right? So that's just the major difference here. So if you just want to view just information, you just want to go with an inquiry window instead of just going with this customer card window. Yeah. Yeah, and this is good if it says you just want to just let someone know where to go just to view some information. Give them access to the customer inquiry, not the customer maintenance where they could actually make changes in the system. Now, let's see. All right, so let me click OK. Let's move on. So we did cards, we did transactions, we took a look at inquiry. We could also take a look at some of the inquiry options. All right, so with the aging functionality under routines. Now the aging functionality is not an automatic process. It's something that you have to do manually. That's how GP has it. They currently has it as a separate process. So in order to age, you may want to take your balances from, say, your current period, or from your 1 to 30 period, 30, 31 period, 60 to 180 period, etc. Now, this is where you have to go in order to do that within the routines section of the receivables management module, right? So you will select your aging date, which is your system date, right? And then you will click process, right? So you will select the date here, and then you will click process, right? Let's close the printed report. So if it is I was to go back into inquiry and pull up a receivable summary, my customer ID, accurate printing. Okay, calculate. So now your buckets are going to be up to date, with the information that you just processed, right? So just keep in mind that the process is not automatic. It's something that you just have to do manually in GP. Now, after you run your aging, you may want to maybe assess finance charges or print your statements. That is done in the inquiry screen. Sorry, in the routine screen. Right, so just keep in mind that this window, what it does, it looks at your customer setup, right? It's going to actually, it's going to let you know, or it's going to be able to tell you how you're going to assess this customer. So the first customer that we were looking at had, I think it was a 1.5% finance charge. So it's going to say that anything that's overdue for this customer, right, it's going to assess a 1.5% to their balance, right? So this is actually going to create a transaction and it's going to apply that to their account. It's going to process the statements so that they can run the aging and assess the finance charges to their account. Now with these statements, you have already run your aging, you assess your finance charges and everything is fine. Now you can print your receivable statement report. Here you can start generating your statements. So you would give yourself a statement ID. You're going to give yourself a description. You're going to choose what form you want to use, what address it's coming from, etc. All of that information is going to be stated here. If you want to print credit limits on your statements, finance charges on your statements, if you want to show payment terms on your statements, all of that can be selected, right? You are going to have to tweak these statements based on what it is you would like to see on that statement. So all of that is at your disposal in this window. Then you select the range, and based on the range, you can select this customer ID, select the range of customers that you would like to print the statements for, and then you click print and it generates the statements for those customers, right? With the write-off documents, it's similar to the finance charge process. So the settings are at the customer end, so it will let you know how much this write-off process is actually going to do. So if, for example, you do have a customer with a $10 receivable balance, for example, and you want to set their maximum write-off balance for, say, $5, when you run this process, it is going to automatically write off that $5, all right, for that particular customer. So just like the finance charge, it's going to create a transaction called a write-off, and it's going to actually reduce the customer balance based on the amount that you have stated, the write-off amount that you have stated for that particular customer, right? So the balance is not going to be reduced by running this process. We have pay transaction removal tool. As we saw in the inquiry screen, we do have the work, open, and history, right? Now, when you fully apply any invoice in GP, it stays in the open status until you run this paid sales transaction removal tool, right? So on this screen, you would have to run this tool if it is you would like to move it from the open status to history status, right? So as you saw, when I pull the transactions for my previous customer, all my transactions were located in open. So in GP, you need to run this process in order to bring it over to the history. Now, so it doesn't actually remove the documents. It will just basically take those documents that have been fully applied and it will move it to your historical status. So it's going to allow you to have fewer transactions in the system. It's going to be able to see all your transactions that have been applied, because it's just going to allow you to kind of like speed up your system when you run the paid transaction removal tool, right? Just ensure that you have your history saved, right? Because if it is you don't want to store the history, then it's actually going to remove it from the system, right? What is going to be useful for the GP end users, you can view the help window. You can view the contents of this window. So what this is going to allow you to do is actually see, right, the information on all the modules. So it's going to give you a holistic view of what each window is about. So if it is you need to read a little bit more in detail, here is where you would go. Now, by clicking F1 on the screen, if you're on a particular window and you want to see specifically for that window, you click F1 and it's going to give you a synopsis of what that window is about. So it gives you a synopsis of the paid transaction removal tool. As you can see here, it's going to tell you what this window actually does. If you click on the fields, it will actually break down, right, the information based on what the field does in GP, right? So if you're unsure about a window that you're in GP and you're not sure what it's about, you can click on F1 on the window that you're at and you can take a read. It's going to give you a general idea as to what the window entails, right? Very informative, and all GP end users should use it. All right, so I think that's it for the routines. We can take a look at a couple of the reports that we have available here. So if, for example, you may want to see, oops, let's go to reports, and we may want to see the trial balance report, right? So we have the age trial balance report. So the age trial balance report is as at your current date, right? It's going to give you the information as of now. Your historical trial balance would be what it is, or what your trial balance looked at, say 10 days ago or a month ago, etc. Right? So that's your historical trial balance, right? If it is what you're, well, if it is you trying to accomplish something that you would like to know what's currently owed from all your customers and you want it as at today, then you would run your age trial balance report. If you want to probably run a report that's what the receivables were at, say at the previous month, I will run a historical trial balance. It all depends on what you're really trying to achieve. Now with the with options, just gives you a little bit more options than you get with the age trial balance. Right, so let's click on new. So you have the ability to exclude credit balances if you want to. You can keep it checked. If you want to exclude fully paid documents, you can do that as well. Now we are running an age trial balance as at today. So we are not going to be able to put a date filter. As you can see, there's no date filter on this option report because it's an age trial balance that's currently being run. You do have the ability to choose ranges. So you can filter based on customer ID, customer name, class ID, etc. And you can choose based on your range, insert, and then you can print the report. All right, so this is going to allow you to just see what you want to build a report based on. You can build it on, like I said, built on a particular zip code, particular information. You can just filter here and run your report. So for whatever reason you want to probably select one customer or range of customers, you can generate that report. So I can do an example of one of the report. And you can insert and you can actually just print the report to screen and generate that particular report. All right, and you select print for that report. Right, that would be that will print your aging report. All right. Outside of the aging, you have the historical sales history report. So say, for example, someone wants to see maybe your customers' information for the past 2 years or so, right? You're going to select it under the report's history in this case, right? So under reports and under your history section, we can look at a historical report, maybe the receivables transaction history report, right? And this is going to allow you to get that type of information. With the posting journals, I did mention earlier that you can print the posting journals as the time that you are actually posting the transaction. If not, I did mention that you are able to print it at a later time because GP allows you to print those reports at any time in the system. You can always go back and print it at a later date. So if you are going to try to provide this type of information, maybe to your auditors, you are able to go to the reports, go to the posting journals, print a particular posting report, right? Print a probably transaction maybe from a year or two ago and provide that to your auditors. With the commissions, we didn't really touch on commissions, but if you had a salesperson that was attached to a particular invoice, you can generate reports based on that salesperson. Our transaction did not have a salesperson assigned, but if yours did, you are able to generate a report to see how much commission is actually owed, right, to the particular salesperson that's attached to that invoice. And lastly, the other reporting option that I mentioned would have been the smart list reports. And under the smart list reports, if you are not familiar, you are able to pull particular reports under the sales section, and you are able to see the sales transaction. This is actually sales order processing, right? But under the receivables transaction, here's where you would actually want to go. And here's where you would want to see all the information if you're looking for a big transaction of all the reports in your system. Yeah, you can export to Excel and all that good stuff. One more thing I would like to touch on before we wrap up is the utilities in the system. We're not going to go through all, but I just want to mention there may be cases where you have some instances that you may need to say remove some transactions from the system. Say you have GP in existence, so maybe since 2002, and you need to remove some transactions from the system. You can use this at your own risk, but I strongly suggest you reach out to your partner and have them perform what it is you are trying to do, because they're the consultants that can guide you through something like this. But in GP, you want to get rid of a certain amount of years. You do have the process, the ability to remove transaction history in GP. You are also able to do reconciliation in GP. There may be, for some instance, that your agent report may not be balancing correctly. You can come in here, right, and you can reconcile your current customer information. You could even reconcile your outstanding documents amount, batch information, etc. And that will kind of like put everything back in sync, right, if required. Right, so there may be cases where you may just need to do a reconcile, and that may work everything out for you. If that's not the case, then reach out to your partner. All right, so all right, everyone, I think that's it for this session. I would like to thank each and every one of you for attending today. I know I've gone past the time, so if it is you do have any questions about the receivables module, you can reach out to us at optimus@operations.guru.